Charleston's oldest slave auction records aren't supposed to hold mysteries. They were written by men who worshipped order, ledgers, columns, ink that never lied. And yet, buried in those city archives, there's an anomaly so disturbing that in 1891, local officials quietly tore it out of public view. Among thousands of routine transactions from Ryan Mart's slave auction, one sequence stands alone, like a crack in reality. The same woman, sold again and again, 17 times, to 17 of South Carolina's most powerful plantation owners, all between March and November of 1844. Same age, same skills, same birthmark. 3 dots on the left shoulder blade forming a perfect triangle. Each sale recorded meticulously. Each price higher than the last. Each buyer a pillar of Charleston society. No other case like it exists in the surviving records. No known law, custom, or economic logic explains it. When the South Carolina Historical Society formally cataloged those documents in 1923, they locked this cluster of sales away with a handwritten warning. Requires gubernatorial approval for access. Public interest concerns. Whatever happened at Ryan Mart in 1844, the state decided you shouldn't see it. Before we walk into that auction yard together and watch those sales unfold, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? I love seeing where people are tuning in as we dig into these buried chapters of American history. Now, let's go back to the spring of 1844. The year began with strange weather. A heavy fog rolled in from Charleston Harbor almost every morning, thick enough to beat on brick walls and hang low in the narrow streets. It often lingered past noon, muting sound, turning the city into a damp, gray maze. But fog didn't stop business. Along Chalmers Street, the auction houses carried on. Men in fine coats stepped around chained bodies as casually as they might step around a crate of sugar. Ryan Mart stood among the grandest of these houses, a 3-story brick complex, where the richest planters in South Carolina came to buy the labor that fed their rice fields and cotton empires. Ryan Mart was run by a man who believed in numbers. His name was Thomas Gadsden, 42 years old, former banker, thin, careful hands, a man whose sense of self-worth was built not on compassion, but precision. He had left banking in 1837 and taken over the mart with the same cold discipline he once applied to ledgers and interest tables. Every sale passed under his eye. Every detail. Name, age, scars, skills, height, weight, buyer, seller, price, went into his books with almost obsessive neatness. His ledgers became legendary around Charleston for their accuracy. Lawyers, estate executors, and city officials relied on them to settle disputes. He was, in his own mind, a professional, neutral, a man who handled transactions, not morality. On March 19, 1844, the fog came in thick from the harbor, curling around church steeples and sinking into the cracks of Chalmers Street. When Gadsden unlocked the doors of Ryan Mart that morning, he expected another ordinary day of human commerce. He did not expect Nathaniel Claiborne. The man introduced himself with an easy, practiced politeness, a factor from Savannah, representing a dissolved estate. He carried documents in a leather folio and spoke in the polished, harmless tone of a man used to being welcomed into drawing rooms. Gadsden checked the paperwork. Everything appeared in order. The estate existed. The seals were real. The notary's signatures matched others he'd seen. Then he saw the woman. She stood slightly apart from the others slated for sale that day. Not defiant. not broken. Just composed. Her dress was plain but clean. Her posture straight. Her expression carefully arranged into something that looked like calm. But beneath it, there was a watchfulness Gadsden couldn't quite name. She answered questions in clear, precise English. When Claiborne mentioned she was literate, she didn't flinch. When he added that she spoke French, had experience in household management, needlework, and music, Gadsden noticed several planters drift closer, listening more intently. He recorded her in his ledger, female approx. 28 years of age, literate, skilled in domestic management, fluent in French, trained in music and needlework. And then he noted the oddity that would anchor her identity across every sale. Marking on left shoulder blade, 3 small moles forming perfect triangle. He assigned her inventory number 84473, the name given Delphine. The auction bell rang. The fog thinned outside. Buyers filed into the yard. At first, the sale moved like any other. Men stepped forward, inspecting teeth, arms, backs, turning bodies like livestock. But when Delphine was brought onto the platform, something in the air shifted. There was a focus that went beyond the usual interest, reserved for a skilled house servant. Colonel William Hainsworth opened the bidding. He was a heavy man with vast rice holdings in the Georgetown district. Over 9,000 acres worked by enslaved people he rarely saw as individuals. He started at 1-800. Even that was a high price for a woman, no matter how well trained. Hampton Pinckney quickly answered with 1,000. His family controlled plantations along the coast from Charleston to Beaufort. Normally, he negotiated hard. Today, he didn't even pretend. The bids leapt higher. Gadsden watched the numbers climb and felt the first flicker of unease. There was no economic logic to what he was seeing. The value of a slave was brutal arithmetic, expected years of labor, skill, health, the cost of food and clothing versus the profit of crops. But these men weren't calculating. They were competing. When the hammer fell, the winning bid belonged to Robert Drayton, head of one of the oldest families in South Carolina. He had just paid $2,800 for a single woman, nearly 10 times the usual price for even an exceptional female slave. The other planters exchanged glances, but said nothing. No one wanted to be the man who questioned Drayton publicly. Gadsden recorded the sale with his usual care. Date, price, buyer, inventory number. Drayton arranged transport to his Ashley River plantation and left without further comment. By mid-afternoon, the fog had burned away. The yard at Ryan's Mart was being swept. Paperwork was filed. Another day of commerce concluded. Then, 3 days later, the impossible walked back through Gadsden's door. It came in the same form, with the same calm expression, and the same triangle of marks on her shoulder. The same woman. The same factor. Different papers. Good afternoon, Mr. Gadsden, Claiborne said pleasantly, as if nothing were unusual. I have a consignment for resale. Gadsden stared at Delphine, then at the documents on his desk. Sire, he said slowly, I personally oversaw the sale of this woman to Colonel Drayton 72 hours ago. Her transaction is recorded in my ledgers. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Claiborne replied, still polite, almost amused. I now represent Colonel Drayton's interests. Circumstances have changed. He has decided she is unsuitable for his household. I am authorized to sell her again. Unsuitable. Gadsden flipped through the paperwork. Drayton's signature was there, bold and unmistakable. The language was correct. The notarial seal authentic. On the surface, everything was in order. Slaves were, by law, property. Property could be bought, resold, mortgaged, seized, divided in wills. There was no statute that said an owner couldn't change his mind after 3 days. And yet something in Gadsden recoiled. It wasn't pity. He had learned long ago to keep pity out of his work. It was something else. The sense that a rule he couldn't name had just been quietly broken. He accepted the consignment. What else could he do? 4 days after the first sale, Delphine stood on the platform again. This time the bidding started at 30,000 and soared even faster. Some of the men who had bid furiously before didn't show their faces. Others, who had remained in the background during the first sale, now pushed forward. Eyes sharp. Voices steady. They had heard something. When the auction ended, Charles Coatsworth Pinckney, cousin to Hampton, owner of vast indigo lands near Walterboro, signed for her at 3,200. He said almost nothing. Arranged her transport. Left. Gadsden watched them go, then closed his ledger. He stared at the neat ink lines until the numbers blurred. The factor would return. He knew it with the same cold certainty he brought to his balances and accounts. Whatever had begun when Delphine stepped into Ryan Mart. On that heavy morning was not finished. And somewhere under the weight of his own perfect handwriting, under the comfort of neatly ruled pages, a crack had opened that his profession, his city, and his conscience would not be able to seal again. By the time Delphine was sold for the 4th time, the word had started to follow her like a shadow. Unsuitable. It reappeared in every authorization, written in different hands, but with the same careful distance, the same refusal to explain. Not dangerous, not defiant, not ill, just that one vague verdict that said everything and nothing at once. After the second sale to Charles Coatsworth Pinckney, Claiborne returned exactly 1 week later. The fog was lighter that morning, hanging in thin ribbons, between the buildings on Chalmers Street, but Gadsden felt heavier than he had in years. He didn't bother pretending to be surprised when the factor stepped into his office. "She is again unsuitable," Claiborne said mildly, placing fresh documents on the desk. That word again. The same precise script. The same legal forms, now bearing Pinckney's signature. Gadsden checked the seals, the witnesses, the dates. All correct. All clean. "How many times do you expect to repeat this?" he asked, before he could stop himself. "As many as it takes," Claiborne replied. "Until the proper education is complete." Gadsden frowned. Education for whom? The factor smiled faintly. For the buyers, of course. He said nothing more. By mid-April, the patterns had hardened. Each buyer was a name that meant something in Charleston: Drayton, Pinckney, Huger, Gaylord. Men whose families had sat in pews at St. Michael's since before the Revolution, whose portraits hung in halls lined with rice money and cotton money and slave money. Men who were not used to being confused by their own decisions. They inspected Delphine with the same routines as any valuable house servant. Questioned her skills, tested her literacy, asked about her health. She stood with that same unsettling composure, eyes lowered but not empty, answering in a voice that never trembled. The bidding, however, never behaved like routine. By the third sale, it leaped over numbers that would have purchased half a dozen field hands. By the sixth, it had reached levels that made Gadsden's banker's mind ache. These were not rational calculations of future yield. This was something closer to obsession, masked as commerce. And always, Within days, she came back. The second time Gadsden saw her re-enter the yard, escorted by Claiborne's detached politeness, he felt something twist in his chest. The third time, that twist turned into a quiet, knowing dread. He started another book. Not an official ledger. Those remained meticulous, clean, fit for courts and auditors. This new volume was a smaller journal he kept locked in a drawer. In it, he wrote what he could not enter into any municipal record. April 16, 1844. Fourth sale completed. Buyer Augustus Huger. Price $4,100. Pattern now impossible to dismiss. Buyers of unimpeachable standing. Each uses the same term in authorization. Unsuitable. All documentation passes legal scrutiny. No law violated. And yet something is wrong. I feel it like pressure in the air before a storm. He added a line he stared at for a long time before closing the book. If there is sin in numbers, this is what it looks like. Outside Ryan Mart, Charleston moved through its usual rituals. Church bells rang. Carriages rattled over cobblestones. Sugar and cotton ships slid in and out of the harbor. But beneath the surface, whispers ran like current through the city's polite circles. No one spoke openly about the woman being sold again and again, but questions slipped into conversations over brandy at the Charleston Club. Did you hear about Drayton's purchase? He's already rid of her, I'm told. How does a man spend that much and change his mind in a week? He says she didn't suit the household. What does that mean? Silences did most of the talking. Other auctioneers began visiting Ryan Mart more often. They came under friendly pretexts, checking prices, trading gossip. But their eyes lingered on Gadsden's block when Delphine was present. Factors who normally fought for consignments suddenly stepped aside when Claiborne appeared, as if some quiet rule had been passed among them. This woman is his business. By early May, the pattern had grown teeth. The sixth sale brought in Theodore Gaylord, a man known for his careful caution. Gaylord rarely overbid. He treated every purchase like an equation, anticipated yield minus risk. He prided himself on never letting sentiment interfere with profit. He paid $6,000 for Delphine. Gadsden watched his hand shake as he signed the papers. 3 days later, Claiborne was back with resale documents. Unsuitable. Again. That evening, after locking the doors of Ryan Mart, Gadsden walked home slower than usual through the damp streets, past lamps that burned in a soft haze. The smell of the harbor drifted in. Salt, tar, and something faintly rotten. His house on Meeting Street was neat, ordered, almost austere. Ledgers were stacked on a side table. An inkstand waited by the window, where he liked to work at night. But instead of opening a ledger, he opened the smaller journal. May 8, 1844. 6 sales completed. Price now at $6,000. Buyers are not fools. Each man has made shrewd decisions in land and labor, yet they bid like gamblers, then reverse course within days, as if burned by something invisible. No signs of madness. No rumors of scandal involving the woman. Only this quiet, impossible word. Unsuitable. He paused, then wrote more slowly, they are changing. I see it in their faces when they come back to town. Drayton avoids gatherings. Pinckney has withdrawn from the clubs. Huger now manages his plantation personally and dismisses visitors. These men, once pillars of certainty, now move as if carrying something they do not want anyone to see. The next week, the whispers reached him in a new form. At the Charleston Club, over thick soups and roasted meat, banker Jonathan Willott leaned close across the table. His voice barely rose above a murmur. Hampton Pinckney came to me for a loan, he said. Gadsden blinked. Hampton was old money. Land, slaves, and credit flowed around his name like water. Pinckney. In need of funds. $15,000. Immediate. What did he say it was for? Willott's mouth tightened. I called it an investment that did not yield as expected. When I pressed him, he agitated. Repeated that word. Unsuitable. Left my office, looking as if I'd accused him of something. Gadsden felt a chill that had nothing to do with the club's drafty dining room. Do you know if the timing coincides with any recent purchases? Willott narrowed his eyes. If it does, it is not my place to say. But you keep such excellent records, Thomas. Perhaps you already know. That night, back at his desk, Gadsden lit a fresh candle and opened both his official ledger and his private journal. He traced names, dates, prices. He thought of Hampton's strained expression, the way the word unsuitable seemed to have settled into Charleston's vocabulary with quiet violence. He realized something else: the men who had purchased Delphine were not merely planters. They were men whose opinions shaped laws, credit, and custom. If you wanted to understand how a system endured, you studied them. If you wanted to break it, you started with them. He didn't yet believe in anything beyond numbers and cause and effect. But he could see the pattern forming like a figure emerging from fog. The next day, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He stayed late after closing, listening to the building settle around him, the wooden beams creaking softly. Then he unlocked the drawer with the private journal and took out another slip of paper with a name on it. David Brunson, a former constable, a man who had left official service to become something else. An investigator for lawyers, merchants, men who needed things known quietly. When Brunson arrived at Ryan Mart the following evening, the yard was empty save for a few stains on the packed earth, where bodies had stood that morning. He was broad-shouldered, with the look of a man who had seen too many fights to be impressed by polite society. You said it was urgent, Brunson remarked, stepping into Gadsden's office. Gadsden closed the door behind him and, for the first time since he'd taken over the mart, felt like the room was not entirely his. The ledgers on the shelves seemed to watch them. It is, Gadsden said. I need you to follow a matter that, by all logic, should not exist. He laid out copies of ledger entries across the desk. Names, dates, prices. The same inventory number repeating like a ghost: 84473. Brunson scanned the pages in silence, his brows drawing together. 17 men, he asked finally. Not yet, Gadsden said quietly. 6, so far. I believe there will be more. And you want to know what happens to her after they leave here? Yes, Gadsden replied. I want to know what makes these men pay irrational sums, then reverse themselves within days. I want to know what unsuitable means in their mouths. Brunson leaned back, considering. You realize, he said slowly, that nothing in these pages is illegal. I know, Gadsden answered. That's what frightens me. Brunson nodded once. All right. I'll go to the plantations. Talk to overseers. Servants. Anyone who might speak more freely than their masters. I'll see what I can find. When you do, Gadsden said, glancing at the ledgers that had once been his pride, you may discover things neither of us are prepared to know. Brunson gave a humorless half-smile. In my experience, that's the only kind of truth worth paying for. Outside, the harbor fog was rolling in again, thinner than in March, but still enough to smear the edges of the gas lamps. As Brunson stepped out into the dim street, Gadsden watched him go and felt a strange, hollow awareness settle in his chest. He had set something in motion. Up to that point, he had been a recorder, a man who turned horror into neat arithmetic. That night, for the first time, he became a participant in whatever was unfolding around inventory number 84473. In the weeks to come, he would regret that choice. But by then, it would be far too late to pretend he did not know. David Brunson disappeared into the Low Country for nearly 3 weeks. When he finally returned to Charleston, the heat had thickened, the marshes steamed at sunset, and the fog that once rolled in from the harbor now clung low to the ground, like something reluctant to leave. He arrived at Ryan Mart after dark, boots caked in mud, coat still carrying the sharp scent of pine forest and river water. Gadsden had been waiting, ledger open, candle burning low, nerves pulled tight. Brunson shut the door behind him. "You'll want to sit," he said. Gadsden didn't. "What did you find?" Brunson spread a stack of notes across the desk. They were written in his rough, angular hand. Observations from plantations stretching from Georgetown to Walterboro. Names repeated like a drumbeat: Drayton, Pinckney, Huger, Gaylord. "Tell me plainly," Gadsden said. Brunson nodded. "All right." He took a breath. Not one of these men kept her longer than 5 days. Gadsden felt a cold, creeping sensation work its way up his spine. "Explain." Brunson began with Drayton, the very first buyer. "Dear Aton to HRE Dois," his house staff told me, Brunson said, that the colonel brought her to the main house, interviewed her privately that first evening, then sat in his study until dawn without speaking to anyone. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. The next morning he ordered her moved to the quarters behind the kitchen. By the third day, he sent word to Charleston that she needed to be resold immediately. Did he give a reason? Brunson shook his head. Wouldn't speak of it, but the servants said he looked unwell. Like a man who had seen something he couldn't explain. Pinckneytwo days. The second buyer had lasted even less time. Charles Coatsworth Pinckney kept her in the main house the first night. His butler, old man who served that family for decades, told me he heard talking from Pinckney's study from midnight until well past sunrise. Talking? Gadsden repeated. Brunson's jaw tightened. Not arguing, not shouting, just talking, for hours. And then, Pinckney emerged in the morning pale as chalk, sent her back to Charleston before noon, and canceled every one of his social engagements for the next 10 days. Gadsden felt his pulse beating in his temples. What did she say to them? I don't know, Brunson replied. But I know what it did. Huger, Owen, Nigh Huger's overseer had been the most forthcoming. He told me Huger bought her with the intention of assigning her as personal attendant to his wife. But the first evening, Mrs. Huger fainted before Delphine even unpacked her satchel. Said the woman's presence made her feel watched. Watched. Not frightened. Not threatened. Just observed. Deeply observed. Brunson looked down at his notes. Huger took Delphine to his study that night. No one knows what happened inside. But come dawn, Huger staggered out looking 10 years older. He ordered her locked in the overseer's cabin and sent for transport to return her to Charleston before breakfast. Gadsden felt a dryness in his throat. Did the overseer hear anything through the cabin walls? Brunson hesitated. He heard her speaking softly, not praying, not begging, speaking as if reciting something. Reciting what? He doesn't know, Brunson said. But he told me this. I've heard confessions from dying men. I've heard sermons and lies and excuses. Whatever she was saying, it weren't for God, and it weren't for us. It was for him. Gilardtredes Gaillard's plantation had offered a detail that disturbed Brunson more than all the others. His personal servant told me, Brunson said slowly, that Gaillard locked himself in his study with her for hours. But unlike the others, Gaillard didn't look terrified when he came out. How did he look? Ruined. Brunson whispered. Like a man who had been convinced of something he never wanted to believe. He thumbed through his notes and read a line aloud. When he emerged, he said to no one in particular, I have misvalued everything. The candle flickered. Neither man breathed. Gadsden felt a weight settling on him, something he had no name for but felt in his bones. And then there's Claiborne, Brunson said quietly. Gadsden stiffened. What about him? I tried to find his business records in Savannah. There are none, no licenses, no property. No family, no debts, no credit lines, no record of him ever doing business there. That's impossible. The estate he represented. I checked, Brunson said. The estate existed, but its slave inventory did not include any woman matching Delphine's description. Not in the final dissolution. Not in the previous decade. She was never theirs. Gadsden stared at him. Then where did she come from? Brunson's voice turned low, strained. It's as if she appeared out of the fog with papers that shouldn't exist and yet pass every inspection. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. At last, Gadsden whispered, Did anyone describe her behavior? Did anyone say she acted strangely? Brunson shook his head slowly. No. And that's the strangest part. She did nothing. Nothing but talk. Nothing but speak to them. Speak to them about what? Brunson met his eyes. About themselves. The room seemed to tilt. What do you mean? Brunson leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. She told them things she should not know. Things they have done. Decisions they made in secret. People they've hurt. The buyers didn't call her unsuitable because she lacked skill. They called her unsuitable because she knew them. Gadsden felt his heartbeat faltering. How? Brunson closed his notebook and slid it across the desk. You hired me to find the truth, he said. This is the closest I can give you whatever she is. She is not what the papers say. And whatever these men saw in her, heard from her, it broke something in them. Gadsden's voice cracked. Why them? Why these particular buyers? Brunson met his eyes steadily. Because they were proud. Because they were powerful. Because they believed they understood the world and their place in it. And she shattered that. He stood, stepping back toward the door. There's something else, Thomas. She's going to be sold again. And when she is, Claiborne will bring her right back here. I know, Gadsden whispered. No. Brunson shook his head. You don't. Because the next sale won't be like the others. Gadsden swallowed hard. What do you mean? Brunson's answer chilled him to his marrow. Claiborne told me something. Something I can't shake. He said there will be 19 sales in total. And when I asked him how he knew that number, The former constable paused. He said, "Because I've already seen the last buyer." The candle hissed. The fog outside pressed against the window like breath. And Thomas Gadsden understood, too late, that the pattern was not repeating. It was escalating. By June, Ryan Mart was no longer simply an auction house. It was the center of a quiet, tightening web. One that Gadsden felt himself caught in more each day. Business continued outwardly unchanged. Field hands were sold in lots. Cooks and carpenters fetched steady prices. Estate liquidations were processed. But behind every transaction, Gadsden now sensed a wrongness he couldn't name. It began with small changes in himself. He hesitated before writing entries he once recorded without thought. He paused when examining children sold away from their mothers. He found himself staring at the ink on his hands, as if seeing blood. His ledgers, once the pride of his professional life, now felt like tombstones he had carved with his own careful pen. The city begins to whisper Charleston society was a place of polished surfaces, where manners held everything in place. But beneath the marble and magnolia, gossip traveled like a fever. It began with the buyers. Robert Drayton was no longer seen at the Charleston Club. Charles Pinckney stopped attending the Steen, Cecilia Society concerts. Augustus Huger dismissed his overseer of 20 years. Theodore Gaylord had ceased going to church entirely. In drawing rooms and parlors, the whispers formed patterns. Drayton's hands shake now. Huger's wife hasn't left her room. Gaylord's sons say he paces at night. And one word surfaced again and again, spoken in the uneasy tone reserved for things polite society pretended not to see unsuitable. Not just the woman. The men. Claiborne returns. Again on a sweltering afternoon in late June, when the air hung thick as syrup, the door to Gadsden's office opened without a knock. Claiborne stepped inside as if he had been expected. And perhaps, Gadsden realized bitterly, he had been. "I trust you have space in your books," the factor said. "Another resale?" Gadsden asked, though the answer was already in his ledger before he wrote it. "Yes," Claiborne replied. Mistirred. "Gaylord has discovered she is unsuitable." The word struck the room like a cold draft. Gadsden forced himself to look over the documents, though he already knew every seal and signature would be perfect. "I must ask," he said, setting the papers down carefully. "What is your interest in this sequence? Why involve these particular men?" Claiborne's smile was faint, almost sympathetic. "Because they believe they own the world," he said. "And it is instructive for such men to encounter something they cannot possess." Gadsden's pulse quickened. "You speak as if this is all intentional." "It is," Claiborne replied. "But not by me." He placed his hat on the desk. "I am merely an agent, a facilitator. The lesson does not originate with me." Gadsden swallowed hard. "Then with whom?" Claiborne's answer was quiet. "With the one you keep selling." The private journal deepens that night. Gadsden sat alone in his study, the candle sputtering as if struggling to remain lit in the humid air. He opened his private journal and wrote June 21st, 1844. "I now believe these sales are not accidents, nor coincidences. The pattern is deliberate, though the purpose remains beyond comprehension. Each buyer changes after purchasing her, withdraws from society, struggles with conscience, perhaps madness." He dipped his pen again. "I have facilitated these transactions without question for years, believing myself merely a clerk of commerce. Now I am beginning to suspect I am curator of something far darker. The ledger does not balance. It never has. Brunson brings back more than news the next week. Brunson appeared at the Mart again. This time, harsher in face, drawn tight around the eyes. They're deteriorating, he said without preamble. All of them. Explain. Brunson sat heavily. I returned to the Drayton plantation. The colonel's wife has moved back to her parents' home. Drayton stays up through the night muttering numbers. Prices, ages, names of slaves he sold or bought over the years. He keeps repeating, she knew. She knew everything. And Pinckney. Pinckney dismissed half his household staff. Says he can't stand to be around anyone who might remind him of something, she said to him. And Huger. Brunson hesitated. Huger won't let mirrors stay in his house. He ordered all of them removed after she left. Gadsden felt the room tilting. Why? Brunson's voice dropped to a whisper. He claims she made him see himself in a way he cannot bear. Says he never knew his own face until that night. The silence between them thickened. Finally, Gadsden asked, barely audible. What did she do to them? Brunson shook his head slowly. Nothing. That's what frightens them. She doesn't curse, doesn't threaten, doesn't touch them. She simply knows. And when she speaks, she forces them to hear themselves. The buyers changed their world by July. The transformation among the first buyers had become undeniable. Their wealth remained. Their land remained. The crops still grew. But something within them had cracked. Drayton stopped punishing slaves entirely, an impossibility for any plantation owner in the South. Huger freed 2 enslaved boys he had raised as property. Gaylord began writing letters, long, anguished letters, to Northern abolitionists. Not one of these men would say why. Not one could. The word, unsuitable, became the shield for everything they could not confess. In Charleston's elite circles, people noticed the changes, and they feared them. Because if men like Drayton and Pinckney were shaken, any man could be. If they could be unraveled by a single woman, then the entire world they had built was made of thread, not stone. The fog changes in late July. The fog returned thicker than ever. It slid through the streets at dawn and lingered until afternoon. People commented on it in markets, in taverns, in church steps. But to Gadsden, the fog wasn't weather anymore. It felt like a warning. A boundary, or a veil being drawn tighter around Charleston. And each morning, as the fog curled around the brick walls of Ryan's Mart, Gadsden sensed the city was changing, becoming something else, or perhaps revealing something that had always been there, buried beneath etiquette and commerce and cruelty. The 7th sale, when Claiborne returned again. On a morning where the fog seemed to have a weight of its own. Gadsden did not ask for explanations. He simply opened his ledger and wrote 7th sale completed. Price $5,400. Buyer Theodore Gaylord. Resold within 72 hours. Unsuitable. As he set down his pen, his hand shook. This was no longer bad business. This was prophecy. And though he would not admit it aloud, not yet, Thomas Gadsden had realized a truth that hollowed him from the inside out. This woman was not passing through the planter's world. She was dismantling it. One man at a time. By August, Charleston felt different. Not in any way the city could name publicly. Its streets still bustled with merchants and servants. Its piazzas still filled with the warm chatter of society women. Its wharves still rattled with the work of enslaved hands. But underneath that respectable surface, something old and uneasy had begun to stir. It followed the men who had purchased Delphine. It hung in the fog that now drifted inland, even on windless mornings. And it clung, most of all, to Ryan Mart. The factor's return on the morning of August 12th. Gadsden was sorting inventory documents when the temperature in the room shifted, as if someone had opened a door to a colder world. He didn't need to look up to know who stood in the doorway. "Good day, Mr. Gadsden," Claiborne said, his voice calm as ever. But something was different. Gadsden couldn't name it, but the air around the man felt thinner, strained, as if pulled too tight. Another resale. Another unsuitable. Claiborne set the papers down. "Mr. Huger regrets the purchase. He finds her unsuitable for his household." That word again. It hung in the air like a stain. Gadsden examined the documents and paused, confused. "This signature," he said slowly. "It looks unsteady." Claiborne's expression didn't change. Mr. Huger was not at his best when he signed. "What happened to him?" Claiborne tilted his head. "Education." A quiet dread pressed into Gadsden's ribs. "Tell me," Gadsden said softly. Do you enjoy this?" Something flickered in Claiborne's eyes. Not joy, not cruelty. Something far more unsettling. Recognition. "Whether I enjoy it is irrelevant," he said. "The sequence must complete. The truth must be delivered." "To whom?" Gadsden demanded. "To the buyers? To the city? To me?" Claiborne simply gave that faint, maddening half-smile. "Truth goes where it is needed. No past. No shadow." The next time Brunson returned from his inquiries, he didn't bother sitting. "I have something you need to hear," he said. Gadsden braced himself. I watched Claiborne. Brunson continued. Followed him from the mart. He walked down Queen Street. Passed into an alley near Meeting. He paused. "I followed him into that alley," Brunson said slowly. "And he wasn't there. Not behind. Not anywhere. You lost him." "No," Brunson insisted. "I didn't lose him. He was gone." The candle between them flickered sharply. "I stood in that alley," Brunson continued, "and I realized two things. One, Claiborne does not leave footprints. Not in dust, not in mud, not in sand. He swallowed. And two, he casts no shadow." Gadsden froze. "That's impossible." Brunson leaned closer. "Thomas, I was a constable for 12 years. I've tracked murderers through forests. I've followed runaway slaves for miles across marshland. But I have never seen a man who leaves no trace." Gadsden's pulse hammered. "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know," Brunson whispered. "But Claiborne isn't a factor. He isn't a businessman. And I don't think he's—" Brunson hesitated. "From Savannah, or anywhere else on this earth." The silence swelled heavy enough to choke the room. The Drayton confession 2 days later, a messenger arrived at Ryan Mart carrying a sealed letter. When Gadsden saw the handwriting, his stomach dropped. "Robert Drayton." He tore it open. "Mr. Gadsden, I must confess something before I lose the courage to set pen to paper. She spoke to me of my holdings, my debts, my sins. She spoke names I have not said aloud in years, deeds I buried even from myself. She told me what my father did, and what his father did, and why our land prospered. She said their ghosts walk beside us. I hear them now. Do not let Claiborne return her to me. I cannot survive another night in her presence." The letter ended abruptly, ink smeared as if Drayton's hand had trembled violently. Gadsden folded the paper slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might burn him. The eighth sale brought chaos. Buyers no longer approached with calculation. They arrived with something closer to frenzy. Some came to prove themselves worthy. Others came to conquer whatever had conquered their peers. Still others came chasing rumors they pretended not to believe. When Delphine stepped onto the platform, the room fell into a hush thick with awe and terror. Her presence felt different now. Heavier, sharper, as if she had grown stronger with each sale. The bidding began at 5,000. It reached 10,000 within minutes. Men who had never spoken to each other shouted across the room. Old rivals outbid each other without hesitation. A planter from Beaufort fainted before the price even reached its peak. Finally, at door 11,600, the hammer fell. Buyer, Theodore Gaylord's cousin, Jonathan Huger. Another pillar of Charleston society. Gadsden recorded the transaction with hands that shook uncontrollably. As he closed the ledger, he realized something terrible. These were not isolated sales. These were steps, a progression, a ritual, an unraveling, and the city's most powerful men were being chosen, one by one. Delphine's growing silence after the sale. As Delphine was led out of the yard, she turned, slowly, and met Gadsden's gaze for the very first time. Her eyes did not accuse. They did not plead. They simply saw him. And in that moment, Gadsden felt an overwhelming certainty. She knew him. Knew everything he had sold. Everything he had hidden. Everything he had justified with ink and neat arithmetic. Her silence was worse than any condemnation. The realization that night, Gadsden wrote in his private journal, "She is not being sold. She is being delivered. Delivered to men who need her. Delivered to men she chooses. Delivered to men whose ruin has already begun. The question is no longer what she is. The question is why she has not yet come for me." And below that entry, he wrote a final, trembling sentence. Claiborne said there will be 19 sales. The city holds its breath for the 19th. But I fear the 18th, because I know who that buyer will be. By September, the rhythm of Charleston had grown fractured. Still polite on the surface, still perfumed and well-dressed, but beneath it ran a tension as cold and fine as piano wire. Nothing visible had changed. Ships still unloaded rice and cotton. Carriages still rattled over cobblestones. Church bells still rang across the peninsula. But something else rang too. Unspoken. Ominous. Near. It lived in the tremor of men's voices when they spoke of debt. In the haunted look of former buyers, who now avoided each other's eyes. In the sudden quiet that fell whenever Delphine's name was almost spoken before being swallowed again. The city knew something was wrong, but it did not yet know that something was coming. The 17th buyer falls. John Calhoun Preston. Prestigious, polished, politically groomed for greatness, had lasted longer than most, 4 days. On the 5th, he sent word to Gadsden. On the 6th, he could not form sentences. By the 7th, he begged his wife to burn every letter he had ever written. Brunson returned from the Preston estate with a face the color of ash. "He's been sitting in his study for days," Brunson said. "Won't eat. Won't sleep. Keeps saying she made him explain the laws he believed in, and then made him understand what those laws truly meant." "What did she do to him?" Gadsden whispered. "She asked questions," Brunson replied. "Only questions." Gadsden felt something close to terror. Not because the buyers were breaking. He had almost grown used to that. But because the pattern was tightening, accelerating, converging. When Preston's resale documents arrived, shaking handwriting, uneven ink, Gadsden did not bother pretending to be shocked. He simply recorded the transaction. Number 17. 2 more, Claiborne had promised. 2 more. The city did not know what it was waiting for. Gadsden did. Claiborne's pronouncement. The morning after Preston's resale, Claiborne arrived early. So early the mist still clung to the iron railings outside the mart. He carried no papers at first, only silence. "We are nearly at the end," he said. Gadsden felt his hands grow cold. "Whose end?" "The sequences," Claiborne replied. "Every lesson requires a final demonstration. Every truth requires a final witness." Gadsden swallowed. "And the 18th? Claiborne studied him the way a mathematician studies a figure he already knows the outcome of. "A man must confront the system he serves," he said, "even if he believes himself separate from it." Gadsden's heart hammered. He already knew. He had known since the night Delphine looked at him, as if she had been reading his life like a ledger. "No," Gadsden whispered. "Not me." Claiborne set the documents gently on the table. "Her next buyer," he said, "must be a man who has counted every life he sold as a number, never as a person." Gadsden stumbled back. "I am an auctioneer, a facilitator. I never—" "You never owned them," Claiborne finished. "But you sold them. You wrote them into existence only to erase them with a stroke of ink. You kept your hands clean by telling yourself you were only observing." His voice lowered. "But observers are never innocent." Gadsden felt the floor tilt beneath him. "I refuse," he said hoarsely. "I won't purchase her. I won't be part of your ritual." Claiborne's expression didn't change. "Then the final sale cannot occur, and the truth cannot be completed." "I don't care." "You should," Claiborne said softly, "because refusing will cost you everything. Your business, your reputation, your safety, and perhaps your soul." He reached into his coat and placed something on the desk, a page, ripped from Gadsden's private journal. The journal he kept locked. Hidden. Gadsden stared in disbelief. "I have read the others," Claiborne said calmly. "The entries you made years ago. The transactions you falsified. The ages you altered. The families you separated against court order." Gadsden's throat closed. "If these pages were shared with the right people," Claiborne continued, "your name would become a stain even among men who buy and sell human beings." "You are blackmailing me," Gadsden whispered. "I am offering you your education," Claiborne corrected. "The same education the others received, the one you have facilitated and profited from, yet have never endured." He stepped back. "The 18th sale proceeds tomorrow." And then he spoke the words Gadsden had been dreading for months. "You will be the buyer." The purchase that night, Gadsden walked through his home in a haze. A prison of fine wood, polished floors, silent hallways. His wife had died years before. He had no children, no one to anchor him, no one to stop him. His ledgers watched him from their shelves like silent judges. Rows of names, rows of prices, rows of people he had sold with the same detachment. He now used to balance accounts. He sat at his desk until dawn. By sunrise, he knew what he would do. He signed the loan documents. He borrowed against his business, his home, his future. He walked into Ryan's Mart and stood at the front of the auction floor, not as a witness, not as a recorder, but as a buyer. "Inventory A4473, Claiborne announced. Opening bid $8,000. No one else bid. The room was silent. Everyone present already knew the outcome. Gadsden raised his hand. The gesture felt like a confession. 8,000. Claiborne nodded. Sold. And just like that, Thomas Gadsden, auctioneer, recorder, believer in order, became Delphine's 18th owner. The night of reckoning, she was brought to his office after dusk. The room felt too small. The candlelight too bright. The air too thin. Delphine stood in the doorway, calm as still water. Her eyes fixed on him, not cruel, not mocking, simply knowing. "Sit," she said gently. He sat. "We have much to speak about," she continued. And then she began. Her voice was soft, steady, surgical. She spoke of every sale he had ever conducted. Every child torn from a mother's arms. Every man sold despite cracks in his ribs. Every woman whose pregnancy he had hidden to increase her price. She recited their names. Every one. She recited dates. She recited destinations. She recited screams he had forgotten, and ones he had pretended not to hear. When he wept, she did not stop. When he begged, she did not stop. When he said he didn't know, she told him he had always known. By dawn, he was shaking uncontrollably. Delphine rose, walked to the door, and spoke her final words. "You have spent 7 years selling human beings, Mr. Gadsden. Tonight, for the first time, you became one." She paused. "Now you understand." She left. And Gadsden collapsed over his desk, sobbing into the ledgers he had once kept so perfectly neat. The final sale approaches by afternoon. He had already signed the resale authorization. He wanted her gone. He wanted to forget. But the remembering had already begun. And worse, he knew who the 19th buyer would be, because Claiborne had said the final man must represent everything the system has created. And in Charleston, there was only one such man. Gadsden stared at the empty auction block, trembling. The 18th sale had been his. The 19th would be a reckoning the city would never forget. Charleston awoke on October 26, 1844, beneath a sky the color of wet slate. No sun broke through the clouds. No wind stirred the harbor. The city felt suspended, as if something enormous was holding its breath. Inside Ryan Mart, Thomas Gadsden stood alone on the auction floor. He had not slept in 2 nights. He had barely eaten. His hands trembled whenever he touched a ledger. The 18th sale had hollowed him. The 18th sale had exposed him. But the 19th would end it. Claiborne had said so. And Gadsden now understood something with a dreadful clarity. He would rather die than witness another man go through what he had endured. But the final buyer was already on his way. The man Charleston believed untouchable. His footsteps announced him before his name did. Langdon Cheeves, Jr., son of one of South Carolina's most powerful families. Political heir to generations of lawmakers, judges, and slaveholding philosophers. A man groomed to lead the South deeper into its moral necessity, the institution of slavery. Cheeves entered without hesitation, without fear, without even curiosity. He carried himself like a man who believed nothing in this world could unmake him. He addressed Gadsden with casual indifference. "I understand there is a remarkable acquisition for sale today." Gadsden could barely speak. "Inventory 84,473, yes." Cheeves glanced around the room, amused. "I hear the previous buyers were overwhelmed by her presence." He smiled thinly. "I assure you, Mr. Gadsden, I am not so easily swayed." Gadsden wanted to scream, to warn him, to tell him to run. But the words stayed trapped in his throat like stones. Then Claiborne entered. The entire room shifted, as if responding to a change in pressure. He carried no papers. He needed none. "It is time," Claiborne said. "The final sale begins." When Delphine stepped onto the block, the room fell silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if even the air refused to move. She did not look at the bidders. She looked only at Cheeves. And Cheeves froze. Not visibly. Not obviously. But something in his eyes flickered. One heartbeat of recognition, of dread, of something primal and ancient and buried. But arrogance is a strong shield. He blinked, straightened, and raised his chin. 5,000 to begin, Cheeves said lightly. "No need," Claiborne replied. Gadsden stared at him. "Sir, the bids." "There will be no bidding," Claiborne said. "The final buyer has already been chosen." Cheeves looked confused, then insulted. "Do you intend to deny me the right?" "No," Claiborne said. "I intend to complete the forfeiture." He placed his hand on the ledger. Inventory 84473. Sold to Langdon Cheeves Jenner. Cheeves smiled triumphantly. Gadsden shuddered. Delphine stepped down from the block without being prompted. She walked toward Cheeves with a grace that seemed to quiet the entire building. What happened that night? Household servants later whispered about it for decades, but none saw everything. What they did witness was this. Cheeves brought Delphine into his study the moment they arrived at his estate. He ordered dinner for two. He dismissed every servant. From behind the heavy oak door, they heard talking. Hours of talking. But not like an argument. Not like a confession. More like a lecture. A lesson. A judgment. As the night deepened, the servants heard Cheeves's voice rising, not in anger, but in terror. He spoke of names long buried, people his ancestors had destroyed, children whose deaths had been hidden, women whose screams still echoed in the walls of old Carolina houses. Hours passed. The servants gathered in the hallway, frightened and helpless. When dawn broke, the door opened. Delphine stepped out. She walked calmly down the hall, past every servant, out the front door. No carriage took her. No escort followed. She simply walked into the morning fog and disappeared. When the servants finally found the courage to enter Cheeves's study, they discovered him sitting at his desk. Eyes open. Hands folded. Face drained of all color. Dead. The official cause: heart failure. The truth. No one in that house ever forgot the expression on his face. A look of a man who had been forced to see the weight of every soul he had owned. Charleston silences the story within a week. Rumors spread like wildfire. By month's end, the city took action. Pages documenting the sales were quietly removed from public ledgers. City archivists sealed all references to Delphine. The Historical Society restricted access to the Ryan Mart records in 1891, citing public interest concerns. And the story of the woman sold 19 times, then freed, then vanished, became something spoken only in whispers. Gadsden's final days. Gadsden left Charleston months later. He moved to Baltimore, opened a small accounting practice, spoke to no one of his past, but he carried Delphine with him, carried her in his guilt, carried her in his nightmares. He tried to write the truth. He tried 19 times. Every manuscript stopped mid-sentence. When he died in 1863, his final journal entry read, "She was not vengeance. She was not justice. She was understanding. And understanding destroyed us all." What became of Delphine? No record ever surfaced. Not in census logs. Not in church books. Not in Northern freedmen's societies. It is as if the fog that swallowed her simply kept her. The last question, what was she? A woman with knowledge beyond reason? A spirit called forth by centuries of suffering? A lesson made flesh? Or a mirror in which powerful men finally saw their true selves? Charleston never answered that question. Maybe it couldn't. Maybe the answer lies only in those missing ledger pages, locked in an archive marked requires gubernatorial approval and hidden from public view. Maybe the answer is still waiting. And maybe, somewhere in America, another city, another archive, another forgotten ledger is waiting to reveal what Charleston tried to bury.